I want to do a little dev blog update today. Did a little experiment yesterday where I was trying to, okay, the goal is that when a projectile hits, I want to have a impact mark. I kind of wanted it to look hot and then cool down over time, and that's the goal, because I think right now when you hit something, it's a little bit like, it just kind of pops out, and I don't really like it. I want to understand the process of how to do this. So I started with the idea of creating my own material. This is what it is. It's kind of like a plasma splat. These are not great, but I just kind of wanted to try something, and I'm gonna probably make more of them in the future. Where's my layers? Window, recently closed layers. Okay. So this is what it was. I just kind of splatted some water paint on a paper and blew it around. I don't really like the way that some of them are turning out, but I kind of like this one, or the ones that are a little more round and maybe less on the edges, less squiggly, because it tends to not. I just don't think it looks that great. But anyway, this is what I started with. I cut them out and I turned them to grayscale, and then I played with the gray distribution with a histogram curve and adjusted the brightness so I could kind of see some stuff in it. I could get a little bit more texture in it. This is the one I ended up using for now. It's got a weird crater in it. That might look cool as a normal map, but it doesn't look that great. And as you can see, it kind of gets a little bit loose on the long stretches because I'm not that good. So I don't really like that. But anyway, that's where I started. I exported this texture in 164 by 164. And from there, I imported it. Let me just get onto my test level real quick. From there, I imported it to my assets, materials. Here is the actual texture. But from the texture, we need to make a material. What's the difference? Well, a texture is like a image, a PNG probably. And a material is something that is described in the PBR pipeline. PBR, is that right? Physically based rendering? Yeah, PBR. I'll take a PBR. 2 PBRs over here. So this is the PBR pipeline. It looks like a blueprint. It's one of my favorite things about Unreal, probably my most favorite thing. When you usually describe this stuff, you need to be writing HLSL, high level HLVL, visual scripting, HLVS. What is it? Oh my God. Let's not start with acronyms. This is why the last video was 20 minutes long. All right, no acronyms, but physically based rendering. PBR. Okay, stop with the... All right. I'm freaking out. It looks a lot like blueprints, but it's actually just passing a value or values. In this case, I'm passing a single color, and then I'm just taking all the channels. So this is RGB and probably also alpha. In this case, I have a scalar parameter, and I'm just using a scalar, some number. Same with heat, also a scalar, heat, power, and color. These are my parameters. These operations are multiplying them together, combining them to get stuff. This is a black body thing, I'll tell you about that. And I just feed it all into the emissive color channel. And I also am using the opacity channel. I all started with this texture, from which I'm taking the red channel, multiplying it by some stuff, ultimately determining how big these values are. Starts at 500. 500 times whatever the heat scale is, which ranges from 1 to 0, because I'm planning on sliding the heat down over time. So 500 times 1 to 0 would be 500 to 0. Then over here, multiply it by the red values of this image, which essentially we could just imagine as the grayscale for now, because it's a grayscale image. So just imagine that, bright is 1 and dark is 0. So I'm multiplying every pixel by this value up here. So instead of being 1, now it's 500, 0 to 500 based on the heat. Instead of being black, it's 0 times 0 to 500, still 0. Cool. So that's exactly what I'm doing with this node. In fact, if we start to preview it, it doesn't look good because my heat is actually 0. It's all black. Took me a second there. But let me change my heat real quick to something. 1. Apply. Okay, we got something. All right, obviously my texture's not that great. But we're previewing some very high values and some very low values. I'm surprised it understood that should be emissive when I preview, because it shouldn't actually know that at this point, but that's interesting. And now I'm frozen saving packages. Let's edit to the end of it. Okay, we're back. So I'm previewing this node. We can see some artifacts and stuff that just came out with that. And I'm gonna stop previewing now. So I feed these either very high values or very low values into a black body temperature. So it's going to take this value and assume that I'm talking about Kelvin, and then give me an RGB color for what that temperature should be. If you're familiar with any lighting terms, this is usually how lights are represented. It's one way lights are represented. You look at your light bulb, it should say what the heat is, or what it looks like anyway. So in terms of black body energy, this is what the color would be, something red. Then I multiply that by a color, which, to be honest, I'm realizing it doesn't make a ton of sense. If you multiply red by green, it doesn't necessarily give you green, especially if that red is very large and that green is very small. In other words, this is like 0, 1, 0, and this is like 620, 0. So if I multiply those things together, like dot product, but not actually combining them, adding them up, then it's not really going to give me green. So this was kind of a mistake, but it's fine. I just don't play with that value much. All right, all this stuff feeds into the emissive, and then to get rid of the background, I use the alpha channel of my PNG. Pretty simple. We got other things here that I could do, like I totally don't even have a normal map hooked up. I could do that. That would be kind of fun to do. I may need to generate a normal texture, and maybe I would overlay that on top of this in maybe the green channel. So green would be normal map, so I could pack the textures in. All right, I'm taking too long. This is my material from which I make a material instance. Where is it? It should be like mi sploot. There it is. Why isn't it right next to this one? Maybe because I didn't name them exactly the same. Annoying. So this is exactly the same thing, except the parameters are exposed, so I don't have to re-render when I change them. And now you can see the effect that I'm kind of going for. I'm just dragging up the heat right here. Heat at 1 is full. Heat at 0 is not full. Heat at half, somewhat. So you can see that blackbody radiation does very well with the grayscale. I would recommend not coloring your explosions and to color them with a dynamic heat scale, because then you can do very cool things, make it feel like there's depth. I mean, I don't even know what I'm doing, and I think this looks somewhat convincing. Very pixely because, well, took the picture on my phone, and it's not a great camera. But this is what's going on. So over time, makes it darker, lighter. You get the idea. So basically what I'm doing is I'm taking my projectile, and in the details of it, I've opened up a place to feed in the material when the projectile hits. When the projectile hits, let's see how this works. When the projectile hits, here we are at the end of the entire hit chain. It's mostly just feeding out values and doing stuff with it. Applying damage, for instance, is a big part of it. But spawning a particle system too is a part of it. I may kind of like unify these things into a new class later, but for now, I think what I'm going to do is I have an actor that manages the timeline of the heat and also manages the decal. The projectile is initialized with the material. The projectile hits, it feeds the material into the heat fade decal. Heat fade decal manages that thing over time. And then I also attach to actor from the projectile. So when I hit this thing, I make a decal, heat fade decal, and then I attach it to whatever I hit and orient it appropriate to the surface that it hit. That's important too. Because if you're not oriented right, you'll get something more like this, stretched out in the wrong direction. So here I am with my heat fade decal, just testing it out. I'll go into this, hit start. You can see it fades out right when it hits. Why is that? Go into the heat fade decal, understand what it's doing. Starting in the construction script, the parameters that are exposed get saved. Decal size is something that I need to be able to configure based on different decals or different effects. So that gets fed in. Set decal material into the decal component, which does the rendering onto other surfaces. That needs to happen. Root as a scene, so I can orient the decal facing up, in my opinion. So the decal, it projects down. Anyway, just orientation stuff. I created dynamic material instance from the decal material, or the material in the decal. Interesting convenience method, but basically it's just taking a material, assigning it to this, and replacing it. I need a dynamic material instance variable because I need to change values on it. So I'm saving this for later. Go over to the event graph, and all it does is on begin play, when it spawns, begin a timeline. When the timeline updates, feed in the value from the timeline into the dynamic material, setting scalar parameter value. This is ideally what a blueprint should look like. It should be about tweaking values to your, to what you feel like is good for your art. And it should be very small and easy to read like this. And it shouldn't be too crazy or wild. If you're doing too much, maybe you should think about C++. But at the same time, it's so easy to iterate in blueprints that it's very tempting, but you can get out of control with it. So anyway, visualize my heat track. If I go into the track, it's just a curve-ish. I could smooth it, but I'm lazy, and I don't know how to. It starts at 1, and it goes to 0 over time. So in about 1.5 seconds, it's pretty low, and that's exactly what we saw here. Maybe if it could be faster, but for now, that's what I'm dealing with. Neato. So you can kind of see how my reticle might be working now. I'm pretty much just using an emissive channel to pull out what was once the grayscale and use the black as opacity, and then I color and power the texture. So that's cool. I think this is like a pretty good effect for like zero experience. I remember it's probably too loud for everybody, so I won't shoot right now. But yeah, I mean the color, I think it looks okay. I need to rotate it randomly. Probably just do a little bit more tweaking on it, maybe get a better texture going, but it's a start. Make the explosion a little bit brighter too, so that you don't really see it just happen all at once. You kind of gets hidden from the fact that there's a bright explosion, and I'd like to make those sparks a little bit less floaty and a little bit more volatile. But anyway, interesting stuff, right guys? Okay, bye.